And I think most retailers will probably nod in agreement when I say this, that they have more reports coming at them than they know what to do with. Yep. Right. And I guess the point of these reports is to provide some information that they can act on and do something with. But I think the unintended effect of all these reports has been, the case of deer in headlights. Like, I've got so many things, how do I make a decision? So I think when we looked at it, we said, there's got to be a simpler way to arrive at decisions for a retailer, right? And so that was kind of like the motivation behind the KIC score. How can we take this information and summarize it in a simple enough way that can be digested and acted upon, right? And I think as we looked around, we looked at, multiple indexes, especially things like the FICO score, right? And you look at, it's one number, and it makes credit decisions easy for the person who is providing credit and for the people who are expecting to, maybe take a loan. You simply track that number. If it goes up, it's good. If it goes down, it's not. So we figured, why don't we come up with something like that to represent a shopper's value back to the retailer so that it's easy for the retailer to track. And obviously it has to be supported by a whole bunch of numbers and parameters underneath so that it's reflecting truly the value of that shopper. And that's really the motivation behind the KIC score, is to simplify the decision-making process. We can break it down into 5 big buckets, if you will. So we're looking at how much shoppers spend. We look at how many items they buy on a typical trip, how many categories they buy in, and how many trips they make per week. And then also looking at what price points they buy at, right? So all of those are combined, and this actually comprises several hundred parameters, are combined together to create this KIC score. So it's really indicative of all of these factors. And there is some level of customization that's allowed for a retailer in terms of what categories are important to me, right? So we can weight categories differently based on what's important to a retailer. We can exclude certain items if they don't want it to be factored into the KIC score. So it's fairly customizable, but at the end of it, you get one number that's representing all these shopper behaviors.
Retailers are buried by data, they're buried by all these different reports. But the other challenge I see accompanying that is different departments, different areas across the retail company. Marketing segments customers one way, right, to determine who a best customer is or a high value customer. Merchandising segments them a different way. Operations looks at it yet differently. What you're talking about with this KIC score is applicable and can be used by every department across the retail enterprise.
Absolutely. I think that's the whole idea, is how do you standardize estimating the value of a shopper back to the enterprise, and that's a common language now across retailers. And I think a traditional approach has been segmentation, put people into buckets. And I think that's great with the way it worked, obviously. But I think when you're talking about engagement, when you're talking about strategy and growing shoppers, you can't just club everybody together and say, we're going to grow all these people the same way. I think there has to be a little bit more investigation into why a shopper behaves the way they do, and then have a solution. That it's kind of like, you can't take 100 patients and tell the doctor, hey, I'm going to club all these people, give them all the same medication because they're part of the same segment, right? It just doesn't work like that. You have to be a patient by patient diagnosis and a prescription based on that. So I think that's what the KIC score allows you to do, right? It gives you some key vitals for a shopper. But then when you're actually trying to go ahead and make a prescriptive recommendation to that shopper, it's looking at the sum total of the shopper's behavior before coming up with a recommendation, as opposed to you belong in this group of shoppers and hence you get this. And I think that helps the entire organization now align itself behind a single metric and creates a more cohesive approach to customer engagement and marketing.
So the idea of this KIC score can be used then to support and enable the use of AI, machine learning expert systems that everyone's talking about.
So what we do is take this KIC score, feed it into an AI expert system, which then deconstructs the KIC score, understands what strategy to best employ to grow the particular shopper, and then passes that off to a system like Whisper, which then drives the product recommendation, which is then going to send out those personalized offers, right? So these are all connected nicely in one simple ecosystem here.
What you're describing truly begins to automate the entire marketing personalization process for a retailer and enables them to truly work at the individual customer level at massive scale here.
That's right. And you're talking about taking what used to take maybe half a dozen people working for a whole week or maybe a few weeks with data analysts to come up with a set of offers and a campaign to be able to conceptualize and execute in maybe an hour. I keep referring to this thing called the iPhone moment because that's really what we're doing, right? We're taking this sophisticated marketing personalization and making it simple enough so that you don't have to see and understand everything that's under the hood. You just need to know what you want to do, and then the system does it for you, right? So when you drive a car, you don't need to know how everything works. You just need to know how to operate it. So I think that's really what we're excited about building, is building something that any retailer can just pick up, learn, and it has the intelligence embedded within it.
The efficacy of this approach is way beyond really any other capabilities I'm aware of out in the market today, right? That begin with a segment, right? So I've got a group of customers, let's say, that are at risk of defecting. I take that segment, run it through a personalization engine, but it's treating all of them the same, even though it's somewhat personalized, as opposed to what we're talking about here is true strategic personalization at the individual level.
When you've been doing something for a long time, Gary, you just tend to default to that way of thinking, and it's difficult to disrupt yourself out of that. But I think the KIC score is a great way to kind of step away from that segmented approach. I mean, yes, there are benefits to the segmented approach. I don't think anybody's disputing that. I think, but from a marketing personalization standpoint, you want to deal with a customer individually, one at a time. And I think the second aspect of the KIC score, which I think is equally powerful, is when you're running campaigns over time, you're running marketing campaigns, month over month or week over week, you need some metric that can measure the growth of your shopper over time, right? And instead of just doing campaign-based analytics, did my campaign perform well or not? I mean, yes, sometimes you could throw in some discounts and people are going to buy more, but what you want to know is, has that impacted the long-term behavior of the shopper? Is it truly growing the shopper?
For those retailers that even take the time to try and evaluate a campaign, what they're doing is simply taking a snapshot of that shopper at that point in time. Did they respond to the offers or not? They're not looking at long-term impact.
The industry has become so operationally focused in terms of how to keep the lights on, how to keep the products moving, that there hasn't been enough focus on trying to truly understand who the customer is and how to best grow their value. If you go back 50, 60 years of people who started that corner store, it was not so much about the product, it was about who they were servicing and who the customer was. Provide products and services that would lined up with the expectation of the customer. This approach then allows us to go back to that by leveraging the power of AI and machine learning. I think there's really three key persona that we're looking at who could leverage the KIC score, right? So one is the executive, to give them a simple view of what's happening in their business across their stores, looking at which stores are performing better in terms of KIC and which stores are not. I think the second is the category and the merchandising team, trying to understand behavior of shoppers and how to grow their specific category and merchandise. And then the third is the marketer, right? The digital marketing people who are actually running the campaigns and executing the campaigns. So I think, these are the three key places that we see immediate use of the KIC score. But much like the a lot of these indices that you come up with, they find different use cases all over the place. This is where we can start to come up with, but I think it's exciting enough for most retailers to look at it. To get the KIC score going, it takes really, some basic first-party data. It's not a whole lot of stuff. We can really turn around, if a retailer is willing to provide the data to us, we can turn around, give them KIC score reports in a matter of days, right? We're hoping to get that to a self-serve model here in the next few months. But when it gets there, then you'll be able to log into the portal, upload your data, generate these reports, and see how these things trend over time.